Drowners. They are one of the more well-known monsters in The Witcher, and belong to the family of monsters known as necrophages, which effectively are scavengers that eat the dead bodies of all and relatively easy prey. Although they do appear creepy and a little unsettling, I wouldn't attribute their fame necessarily to this, and I'd add that unlike monsters such as Leshens, fiends, or even higher vampires, they're not exactly intimidating or physically impressive. I'd rather attribute their fame to the fact that they are present in every Witcher game, in pretty much every zone, right from The Witcher 1 to The Witcher 2 to The Witcher 3. I'll also add that pretty much all the information I'll be sharing on these monsters today is from the games and books specifically made for the game lore, as Geralt doesn't encounter one in the actual Witcher books from what I remember, and the only mentions of them pretty much tell us nothing, just stuff like how much Witchers used to charge for taking on contracts for them, and just sort of being referenced as a monster that exists. A drowner has been described on many occasions to resemble a corpse dragged from the bottom of a pond or other filthy body of water. I'm sure this is in part because of the fact these creatures resemble humans and spend the majority of their time in marshland or underwater, but I imagine it's also because of their flushed, blue, slime-covered, hairless bodies, dead bulging fish-like eyes, and, well, rancid smell. When you look at them from a distance, it makes sense why so many folktales state they are just drowned humans risen from the dead, but on a closer inspection, you'll find their entire anatomy is very different to that of a human. For example, their skin, although pale and blue, is in fact scaly to the touch. They also have gills, dorsal fins, webbed feet and hands, with a set of claws on each. These visual differences alone indicate they're an entirely different species to human. Something worth noting is that there appears to be different types of drowner in The Witcher 3. Many of these types look very similar, except for eye and skin differences. Some also have hair on their heads, but the rest of their body remains hairless. However, one type looks entirely different, with what I would describe as fins and tentacles on their faces. The differences between the drowners, at least from what I can find, have not been explicitly stated, obviously except for Drowned Dead and Mucknixer, Drowned Dead basically being just stronger drowners and Mucknixer just being differently coloured Drowned Dead. I don't believe Drowned Dead or Mucknixers are all that different from a normal drowner, par possessing different colours and being stronger, but what I'm saying is the differences between the different types of basic drowner that appear visually different to each other have not been addressed in the lore. I imagine these differences have occurred as the various drowner populations have adapted to their environments. For example, some live in lakes, some live in marshes, and some live in sewers. Vodniks are another breed of drowner mentioned in the Witcher bestiary, and although there are specific legends relating to them that I'll get into soon, they do appear to just be another type of drowner. Perhaps they're supposed to be one of the drowners shown in the game, but we haven't really been told, so we don't know. I know a lot of fans believe including Vodniks in the Witcher bestiary may have just been a mistake on CD PROJEKT RED's part, and they were actually referring to another monster known as a Vodginoi, which I hope I'm saying correctly, and this is a monster based on an actual real-world monster. However, a Vodginoi is not a drowner. They are water-dwelling creatures, but they are an intelligent race that live in cities at the bottom of the Great Sea. They are more similar to Nereids and Mer people. To summarize, drowners and their various forms, Drowned Dead, Mucknixers, and I guess Vodniks, are all pretty much the same, except for the different physical attributes. They have the same abilities, all behave in a very similar way, and pretty much all look the same for the most part. Except the guy with fins in his face. I guess he just likes water the most. Moving on, let's get into where this monster came from. So, is it pre or post conjunction, and what effect has it had on the various peoples of the Witcher world? Drowners are post conjunction monsters, which means they arrived in the world of the Witcher, or the world of the Enshe, via the conjunction of the spheres. Long story short, the conjunction of the spheres was a cataclysmic-like event that caused various worlds to align and deposit samples of the inhabitants of these various worlds onto each other. This is why the world of the Witcher has so much variety in the living beings found there. This is how drowners ended up in the world of the Enshe, the world where the majority of the games and books take place. Nothing is known about their previous world, but I like to personally imagine it's sort of like Dagobah from Star Wars, so very marshy and boggy with lots of little wildlife for them to hunt. Since drowners have entered the world of The Witcher, they have become effectively a public menace. Of course, the majority of monsters in The Witcher are predators of humans and non-humans alike, but what makes drowners so infamous and well known for the peoples of the Northern Kingdoms and Nilfgaard is simply how many of them there are. As I said at the start of the video, in pretty much every location you go in the games, you can somehow find yourself fighting one of these monsters. Of course, they're not going to be in areas like the Painted World, but what I mean is they're in Skellige, Velen, Tucson, in the sewers at Oxenfurt and Novigrad, and just around most coastlines or marshes in these areas. And that's not even to mention all their occurrences in The Witcher 1 and 2. Drowners are also very rarely found alone, and usually exist in packs, which just adds to the sheer quantity of them. For this reason, I'd almost want to argue that drowners have been one of the most influential monsters to the peoples of The Witcher. I imagine they would have been present during most human settlements' early days and presented an annoying problem. I also get the impression that the word drowner is known by most, be that a Scoia'tael warrior, a noble or peasant, whereas a word like chort, fiend or leshen is probably just a bit less well known, which I think you can sort of see when Geralt says a monster's name for a contract. I doubt many peasants or other inhabitants would be like, oh, I don't know what a drowner is. I do realize a lot of what I'm saying here is based on assumption, but I'm pretty sure most of you would agree from reading the books and playing the games that a lot of peasants simply aren't educated enough to know the full Witcher bestiary. However, most will know of drowners, so I'd say their effect on the world has been pretty substantial. The main legend surrounding drowners, drowned dead, mucknixes and vodniks is that they are drowned people risen from the dead. Some examples include lost travelers and children who swim too far from the shore. These legends are of course false, but still widely believed by many. There are also some weird specifics about some of the legends, like how vodniks are specifically drunken peasants who fall into swamps and die, but as I said, this isn't true. Drowners, drowned dead, mucknixes and vodniks are their own monster. The way in which these monsters attack is best described in these three words: fast, fast, and fast. Also in large annoying packs. Drowners are pack animals, so like to attack more dangerous individuals, like say a witcher, in large numbers. They also like to surprise you by rising from the depths, getting in short, quick attacks, and whenever they have the opportunity, go for back attacks. Maybe while you're trying to deal with his friends. I'd like to say my professional witcher recommendation for how to deal with these monsters is to oil up, be careful, and slowly dismantle their numbers, but honestly, I'd recommend just quenning up and igniting them down. Maybe try and get a few back attacks of your own on them while they're stunned. You could also go for the Ard tactic, which involves using Ard and getting some quick finishes in. Bear in mind this only applies if you're fighting them on land, as when they're in the water, they are an entirely different beast. In the case of water warfare, just pull out your handy crossbow, defy the laws of physics, and rain hellfire on these guys. And do it quickly, as they will reach you with that pretty impressive speed, stun you, and run away. To be honest, these guys aren't all that hard to kill in the water, but can be dangerous if you're already on low breath, as if they manage to hit you, you will lose a chunk of it, so maybe drink some killer whale before facing them. Drowners are also known to cohabit with water hags, so of course fighting a pack of drowners and a water hag is a bit of a different story. I generally just go for the same tactic, except I focus the hag and avoid the mud she throws. Or you could just kill the drowners, then the hag, it's honestly up to you. I remember finding a group of drowners and foglets, so I imagine they also cohabit. The tactic is pretty much the same as the hags, just be mindful that a foglet has the ability to create decoys and turn into smoke. Another way in which drowners are known to attack is stealthily, so pulling unsuspecting fishermen from piers or boats, literally drowning them and then maybe clawing them under the water. Interestingly, sometimes drowners save the bodies of their victims underwater to properly season them before eating. The reason I find this interesting is drowners are supposed to be pretty unintelligent, mainly acting on instinct, but clearly saving food and aiming for the best experience when eating shows us that drowners exhibit some level of intelligence past their instincts. I'll also quickly add that drowners don't just eat people, they eat almost anything they can, and this includes the bodies of the dead and fish, etc. Basically, whatever they can eat, they will probably give it a go. To finish off this section on drowners, here's a small note in regards to breeding. Yet again, we don't really know how drowners reproduce. I've been presented with theories like all drowners are male and produce with water hags, as they are known to sometimes cohabit. I've also been told they mate with each other, and I've heard somewhere they potentially reproduce asexually. If I had to say my opinion, I imagine they just reproduce with other drowners. I feel like they're the sort of animal that lay eggs and then fertilize them, sort of like fish. Or maybe the eggs are fertilized inside, then they are laid out, sort of like some sharks. I just don't imagine a drowner would give birth in the same way as a human or non-human. They do have nests in the Witcher games, but it's not made apparent whether they breed in these nests or just have made their home there. I also feel like there are far too many lone packs of drowners for every one of them to have come from a water hag, but perhaps they do, and CD PROJEKT RED just didn't represent this with this sort of water hag drowner population. So pretty much we don't know if drowners have genders or how they reproduce, although I'd say it's not exactly a necessary detail for us to know, although it would be nice. I will say it is quite fun to theorize about though, as, well, anything that we don't know in The Witcher is quite fun to theorize about. In the previous segment, I briefly touched upon the nests drowners can sometimes be found living in. However, drowners are not only found in nests and can be seen to habitate a variety of locations in The Witcher, although each of these locations does have something in common: water. For example, drowners can be found in the sea, on coastlines, in caves, in lakes, in swamps, and in sewers. The cave and sewer, and I suppose sort of swamp drowners, are particularly interesting, as normally the areas in these caves, sewers, and swamps the drowners make their homes in are poisonous to the normal inhabitants of the Witcher world, or in the swamp's case, just close to a lot of poisonous clouds and stuff. Oh, and this includes witches, who are normally more resilient to poisons, as I'm sure most of you will know. This shows just how resistant to these forces drowners are, the fact that they can not only pass through this deadly gas without injury, but also exist and live in it. I think a common assumption is that drowners like to live in their own filth. From my point of view, although they do this, they also live in areas that I would say are pretty clean, like the Skellige Sea or a lake in Tucson. So most likely drowners don't really have a preference either way. They'd be just as happy living in a crystal clear lake as a sewer in Oxenfurt. Speaking of the sewers in Oxenfurt, I find it interesting that in the Hearts of Stone expansion for The Witcher 3, the local drowner populace had learned to cohabit with the Toad Prince who had made his home in the sewers. In fact, we know drowners cohabit with other monsters, such as water hags and foglets, and actively work together with them, which I think sort of shows yet again that they have some level of intelligence. The fact they work together as a pack and can recognize if something poses as a threat, benefit, or meal to them is pretty impressive. This brings me to the end of today's Witcher lore video, and I hope you've all enjoyed. I feel like a video on drowners has been a long time coming, so I'm glad to have finally covered this subject today and either told you guys something new about this monster, or maybe just refreshed your memory of it. As always, if you want to support me in this sort of content, I'd appreciate a like, as it helps the channel out a lot, as does subscribing, and if you subscribe, you'll be able to keep up to date with my weekly Witcher videos. Go and check me out on Twitter for updates and Twitch, as I hope to do something Witcher related on there soon. At the moment, I've mainly been playing story-based games on there, so if you're into that, I have all my past streams on my second channel if you want to go and check them out. Links for all these socials are in the description, as is the channel Discord link, and finally, as always, thank you very much to the Patreon pledges. I really appreciate your support, and want to thank you all for going the extra mile, as although it's not necessary, it is kind. The same goes to all of you who do any of the things I say at the end of these videos, and even those of you that just watch. But of course, it is a particularly special thanks to the Patreon pledges, as I do really appreciate it, guys. It is very, very kind. Anyway, that's it for today's video, and I'll see you in the next one. Have an awesome rest of the week.